Get this shared here. Can everybody see this?
All right, so graphing in AByay. We use graphing in AByay, just like Chris said, to put the data that we take on a daily basis into a way to view it for further analysis. So in AByay, their graphs are considered tools that we use to display and analyze data. And they help to show relationships between different measurements and behaviors. We're going to try as hard as we can to make this a little bit funny. So we have some memes in here as well for a little lightheartedness. Okay, so how is graphing reinforcing to us? Graphing is reinforcing to us as clinicians in a variety of ways. It helps to display the features of behavior changes that we are addressing during our sessions. It helps us to understand some of the patterns of behaviors. So if you're taking ABC data, and then that's graphed, you might be able to see some different patterns that can help you, for example, define the function of a behavior. It also is very important in showing how effective our treatments and our interventions are, if they are creating the behavior changes that we want to see, and if the rate is high enough that it's an intervention that we want to continue using, or if it's not working as well as we want to, and the graphs show that, then we know that we need to make some changes. And then graphs also serve as one of the easiest ways to show families and different families, caregivers, teachers in schools if you're collaborating with them, and then insurance companies. It helps us to show them what we're doing and how it's working, how it's affecting the client. We can spit out as many words as we want, but sometimes it doesn't get across the differences that we're making. So graphs are a really good way to help show that. Okay, so graphs are the least subjective way to display the behaviors that we are observing. They data are data. They, as long as you're taking it or you're not taking it, sorry, as long as the data is being taken in the least subjective ways, then the graphs will show the behaviors that we're seeing in the least subjective ways. So they allow for other clinicians and, like I said, family members, other people that are on your client's team that you may be collaborating with, allows them to see the behaviors and analyze the data that we've collected in order for them to draw their own conclusions.
And in our field of applied behavior analysis, the graphing is the analysis part. Without, if you're not taking data, you're not doing AByay. If you're not graphing that data, you're not doing AByay. It's the, without graphs, we would just be applied behaviorists and not applied behavior analysts.
Okay, so just some graphing terms to go over. Variability, firstly. The variability of a graph refers to how different each individual data point or score is from another. So the graph on the left shows that the variability of that data is stable, while the graph on the right shows data that is very variable, very variable. So yeah, that's variability. And then the level of a graph refers to the position of the data as it is presented on the y-axis. So the lower it is on the y-axis, the lower the level, and then there's moderate and high levels. The graph on the right shows what data points would look like in each level. Okay, and then we have trend, which refers to the direction that the data is going in. So there are 3 trends. There's an increasing trend, which is the first on the graph, and that shows that the behavior is increasing. There's decreasing trend, which shows that the behavior is decreasing, and then there's no trend, which shows that there's no behavior change.
Next are the different. Am I echoing? Okay. Next are the different types of graphs. So we have our line graphs, cumulative graphs, bar graphs, and histograms. Line graphs are the most often used. So they're used to compare multiple different data sets. They can graph percentage, duration, frequency, rate, among other things. Cumulative graphs are ones that would be used mostly with the VB map. To document the verbal operant data and how that's increasing month to month. Bar graphs are able to compare 2 or 3 data sets. And then a histogram would be used only with continuous data, which we'll talk about next. So the 2 different types of data collection, there's continuous measurements and discontinuous measurements. Continuous would record every possible occurrence of a behavior, and discontinuous records a sample of behavior during an observation. The types of continuous measurements are frequency, rate, duration, latency, and inner response time. Discontinuous measurement, whole interval recording, partial interval recording, and momentary time sampling. We're going to go over continuous measurements first. So the frequency is the total number of occurrences of a particular behavior. So think of it as like a tally. So a line graph is the most commonly used graph used for frequency. So the example I have is Paige taps her pencil 23 times during math class. The frequency would be counted as 23 since that's the total amount of times that the behavior occurred. Next, we have rate, and this is the number of occurrences of a behavior, the frequency, during an allotted amount of time. So to calculate this, you'll count the number of times the behavior occurred in the time observed, and then you'll divide that count by the length of time that you observed. So again, a line graph is the most commonly used. An example, Anna kicked a peer 30 times in a 10-minute observation. The rate would be 3 kicks per minute because you take 30 kicks, divide it by the 10-minute observation, and that equals your 3 kicks per minute. Next is duration, which is the total length in which the behavior occurs. Again, line graph, the most common graph used for duration. So an example, Melanie attends school from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and you observe the entire school session. That duration would be 2 hours. So latency is the length of time from an instruction or an SD to the start of the behavior. So an example, Kat told her client to get his shoes. He put them on 42 seconds later. So telling your client to get the shoes, that acts as the start of the stimulus, that's the SD, and you record the length of time until the client would follow through and get their shoes. Inner response time, or IRT, is the elapsed time between 2 successive responses. So during an IT session with Maria, I placed a demand to touch her nose and clap her hands. it took her 5 seconds after touching her nose to clap her hands. This means that the IRT would be 5 seconds. So from the time that she touched her nose to the time that she clapped. So next we'll talk about the types of discontinuous measurements. First is whole interval recording. So plain and simple, did the behavior occur the entire interval? So the whole interval. So you use this when you want to increase a behavior, and it can underestimate the occurrence of a behavior. So example, Chris likes to hum to himself during math class. Each interval is 3 minutes long. Chris hums for 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Would you record this behavior as occurring for the entire interval? This would be no, because it did not happen for the entire 3 minutes. So that would not, you would not check it as happening during that interval. If he hums for 3 minutes, you would record the behavior as occurring. Partial interval recording is if it happens at any point during the interval. Even if it happened for a split second, it happened during that interval, you would count it. So it's used when you want to decrease behavior, and it can overestimate the occurrence of a behavior. Alan uses physical aggression to gain attention from his parents or his peers. In a 5-minute partial interval, Alan only engages in physical aggression 1 time. Would you record this behavior that occurred? The answer is yes, because it just has to happen 1 time. Momentary time sampling is if the behavior occurred at the exact moment that you were recording data. So it's cut and dry. The behavior is either happening or it's not. So this can be helpful for teachers to record data when they're in a full classroom with multiple clients. For an example, you want to know if your client is engaging in self-injurious behavior every 5 minutes throughout the session. When your timer beeps at that 5 minutes, is your client engaging in SIB? If yes, that's momentary time sampling, and you would mark it as such. Okay, so that's our continuous measurements of data and our discontinuous measurements of data. Now we're going to segue into a task analysis for graphing. So after each of these slides, I have a video that goes over each of these steps in more detail. So the first step, you're going to enter the label of your first and second columns. Your first column is going to be the date or the session number, and your second column is going to be the behavior data that you were tracking. You'll enter all the dates and all of the data from your data sheets. You'll highlight and include all those dates and data, and then you'll click Insert, Line Graph, Line with Markers to make your initial graph. I'm going to enter the label of the first and second columns. I've already pre-entered my data, but in column 1, you would type the date and the dates that you observed your client. And in column B, you would type in the behavior that you're tracking. In this case, we're tracking physical aggression and all of the behavior data from your data sheet. You can also designate the baseline and the intervention in the side column. It's not required, but it's helpful. Once your dates and the data have been entered from your data sheet, you may have to convert them from frequency to rate, depending on the graph that you're choosing. Once all of that is entered, you're going to highlight and include all the dates and the data. You'll click Insert, Line Graph, Line with Markers. And this is what your chart will look like at the very beginning. To enter the label of the first.
Okay, so after you do those steps, then the next steps are you're going to right click on the chart, move the chart to a new sheet. You're going to click vertical axis major grid lines and delete. Then you're going to click on, excuse me, you're going to click on the data line in the graph, right click it, and select Format Data Series. Once you do that, you can click on the paint can, and then under the line, you want to change the line color to black, change the width to 1.5, choose your marker from the drop down and then change the color of the marker to black. Another thing that's important when you do this is if when you change the color of the marker to black, you also have to either change the outline of the marker to black or do no outline on the marker.
From here, click the chart or graph. Come down to this tab where it says Move Chart, and you'll select New Sheet. This is also where you can rename this sheet. So I am going to rename it Physical Aggression, since that is what we are graphing. And it will show up in a large format with this tab named Physical Aggression. Next, you'll click these vertical axis meter grid lines, and you'll delete those. Then you'll click the data line in the graph. You'll right-click it and select Format Data Series. This will show up to the right of your screen. You'll then click the paint can, and under the line, you will change the color to black, and you'll also change the width to 1.5. Then you will come back up. You will choose Marker, uncheck and choose the drop-down Fill. Make sure that you change the marker color to black, as well as the borderline for the marker to black. Then all of the markers and your line will be the color black. From here, so next you'll start formatting your Y and X axes. So you'll right-click the Y axis and select Format Axis, and you'll change, it's called the bounds maximum, to 100 to signify 100%. And that is if you're using a percentage graph or rate where it's going to be 0 to 100. It can also, it doesn't have to always be 100%. You want to individualize and tailor it towards the graph that you're choosing. Then you'll right-click the X axis, again, select the format axis, change the axis type to text so that it will only include the dates where you took data. Not like you'll see in the example, there was a weekend that dates popped up, but when you choose text axis, it will only include those data points where data was collected. Then you'll go into the taskbar and choose Chart Design and add chart elements to add the axes titles for both the X and Y axes, and you'll identify your labels accordingly for each axis and the chart title.
Jen, could you go back real quick?
Sure.
So for number 9, when you are changing the format access, so you want to change it to 100 if it's percentage. If it's rate, then you want to change it to 1.0 because you can't have a rate more than 1.0. So like if you're doing a rate of independent versus prompt demands, you would change it to 1.0.
When working with percentage graphs, we're going to right-click the Y-axis and choose Format Axis. The bounds maximum we want to create, type in 100, hit Enter to signify percentages. So this would be 0, 10%, 20%, 30%, and so on until 100%. And again, depending on your graph, your Y-axis may change. For example, this data shows frequency. The Y-axis only goes up to 20 based on the data points. Once you've changed your Y-axis, then you will right-click on your X-axis. Again, Format Axis. And you see how there's 2 dates here that were weekend dates. So I did not observe my client. So I want to change from automatically selected based on the data to text axis, which will change that from 3.6 and then go directly to 3.9, which was my next observation point. Next, we're going to add the axis titles for both the X and the Y axes. You're going to click your chart, choose chart design, and this add chart element. It'll drop down. You'll choose axis title, primary horizontal. This will create your X axis title, as well as your vertical. So the title for my Y axis is the percentage of physical aggression during 2-hour session. The axis title on the X axis is the date. Again, these are customized based on what your data is showing, and the percentage, if it's a percentage or if it's the frequency, and if this is a number of sessions or if this is the date of sessions.
Okay, so after those steps, then you're going to identify your baseline data from your intervention data. To do this, you're going to click the next data point after the baseline phase was completed. You're going to double click that data point, click the paint can and select no line. And then in the taskbar at the top of the screen, you're going to click and insert shape. You're going to choose the line, hold the shift key down, and drag a vertical line in where the data line was previously disconnected. And then also change the color to black and choose a dotted line in the Format Shape tab. And then you're going to insert text boxes for each phase. So for the baseline phase, you're going to insert a text box that says baseline and put that over the baseline data. And then for the intervention data, you're going to insert a text box that says intervention and put that over the intervention data.
We are now going to identify our baseline data from our intervention data. So we'll go back to the first sheet to see when our last date of baseline was. So this was 1, 2, 3 sessions. So March 4th was our last day of baseline. So I'm going to come back to my graph. March 4th was my last day of baseline. I'm going to click the next data point after the last day of baseline. To do this, I click the line once. I select that data point a second time. Double click this data point. Again, the format data point will show up to the right. We're going to click the paint can. We're going to select no line. This breaks the data here from baseline to intervention phases. At the top of the screen, now I have my chart selected. I'm going to select Insert, Shape, Line. This is how I'm going to insert and create my phase change line. I now have crosshairs for my mouse. I'm going to come between the March 4th and the March 5th date, hold down the Shift key, and drag a vertical line all the way up my graph. I will change this from blue to the black line. And then to the right, I will also choose the dash type to be a dotted line. Next, I'm going to insert the text boxes for baseline and intervention phases. You'll select Insert, Text, Text Box, draw your square, baseline, center that, and again, Insert, Text Box, Intervention. Make sure that the text boxes are placed on the correct side of the phase change line. So this is your baseline. This is before the intervention was implemented, and this is your intervention phase after your baseline and once the intervention was implemented. Few last minute tips for your graph. You may notice that some of your titles or the y-axis or x-axis look a little gray compared to the black of your graph. You can simply click the titles, choose black, that darkens it up. Same with your y-axis. You can just click it once, click black, it will darken. You do this for all of your dates and your axes. Then you may notice that the x-axis has tick marks and the y-axis does not. So when you select your x-axis, you will come over to the Format Axis tab. Choose the little bar graph with the 3 bars here. Uncheck tick marks. And these are the ones that are on the outside. You can change the color of them by coming back to the paint can, dropping down and choosing black, and that will darken them. Come on over, click your y-axis, go back to the little bar graph tab, choose tick marks, and the major type, we're going to select outside, and they were already showing up in black. And here's your finished chart. Okay, so next we'll do some like tips and tricks, like fun things for Microsoft Excel. Does anybody have any questions about the task analysis? We can open up for questions at the end too, if there was something you wanted to go over further before we moved on.
This is Hemi. I was wondering if you'd be able to share the recording at another time as well for us to refer to.
Sorry, say that again. I missed the beginning.
Will you have the video recording of the training you just showed us, the how to use Excel, available when we're not meeting as well? Like, is there a link to that video you showed just now?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, go ahead.
I think Chris is recording the training. I'm assuming that he'll be sending that out afterwards for anyone that wants to look back at it or missed it. Chris, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm recording the training the whole training, and we can see about sending out supplemental materials, either just a task analysis as a supplemental material, or maybe just the video. It's a great instructional video that you guys are presenting.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so the first tip, I have 3 of them. So the first trick is called freeze pane. So it'll just help you to identify that you're in the correct data set when you're tracking multiple different behaviors. There can be a lot of data because, you know, we're all about the data. We want as much data as possible. So this video talks about how to make that a little bit easier to manage. The first tip that I'm going to show everyone in Microsoft Excel is how to create a freeze pane. So you'll come up in your Excel sheet. This can be used when you have lots of data and you need to continue to scroll up and down. So you'll select your first row, click View, and freeze top row. This means now that when I scroll down to add my next data points, this first row will stay put, and I'm able to easily enter my next data point without having to scroll back up and down to make sure that I have it selected for the correct graph and the correct targeted behavior. The first tip that I'm going to, okay, so the next one is a permanent phase change line. So this is a little more in detail. Again, I have a TA of this as well that I can definitely add to the supplemental things that Chris is going to be sending out. So this can be used when, we have phase change lines for baseline, when we're implementing an intervention. If a child is sick, COVID-19, that's probably going to be a pretty big phase change line. So this is how you can create a permanent one. So as you add more data, the baseline automatically moves. So you don't have to individually move every single phase change line and every single baseline every time you enter new data. This next tip is going to be how to create a permanent baseline or phase change line. So for right now, I'm going to go into this graph that I've made and selected with this data. I'm actually going to delete the drawn in baseline phase change line that I put in. So my baseline ended on 328. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to insert a row. So this row is going to be blank. And in the third column where there is nothing labeled, I'm going to type 100. Next, I'm going to come to my graph. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select my data. So I want to keep all of this data remaining the same, except now I'm going to also include that 100 data point that I just put in. I'll hit OK. And now I have this little orange dot that is directly between my baseline data points and my intervention data points. So now I'll click this orange dot, go to chart design, add chart element, error bars, choose the more error bars option. Come over to the little bar graph here again. You will keep the direction of both under the error bars. However, you are going to select no cap and you'll change the fixed value to 100 and hit enter. This now becomes your phase change line and it's permanent. So anytime you select or remove data, it will move accordingly. So now we are going to change the color of this data point. So we'll come back to the paint can. We'll go to marker, fill. We don't want there to be any fill. So we'll make it white. And we'll also make the border of it white. So when I click here, there's no longer a dot. However, I can click that in the chart, but there's no longer a visible dot on the chart. So if I want to add more data to show you how this moves with the adding of data, so we'll select all of this data. And it just simply moves, and all you'll have to do, you'll just have to move your baseline and intervention text boxes accordingly. But this phase change line will be permanent on this date that you set. Okay, now this is the last one. So this is the one that I was telling Paige about, and she has been asking me where I've been for the last couple of years once I told her this one.
Blew my mind.
So there's a way, after you've gone through all of the steps of creating your graph, you can actually save it as a template. So the next time you go to make a graph, it's all of your settings are already set, and it'll just choose the data points that you've selected.
Because, and this is the kicker, Excel, there's no, like in Microsoft Word, you can set defaults for text and colors and paragraphs and spacing and all the margins and everything. There's no select as default in Excel. So this is Jen's amazing trick to get around that and still kind of set it as default.
The final and probably most life-changing Excel tip and trick that I'm going to show you is once you have your completed graph, you're going to click the graph and we're going to make this a chart template. So you'll right click the graph, save as template. Let's save this as our AByay template for our graphs. You'll select save. So when I go back, and let's say I want to chart this data here. When I create my new graph, insert line graph, line with markers, this is what my chart will look like. And instead of having to go through all of those steps, I will just simply right click, change chart type, come down to templates, and select my AByay template. So now I can enlarge this. All I need to do is move my phase change line. If I need to switch up when my baseline took place, type in all my titles, but all of my markers, the lines have already been set, and I've saved myself all of that time from going back and having to do all those steps again for each individual chart. So that's it. Do you guys have any questions?
No, but you're right. That last step was amazing. Oh my gosh. That is truly a life changer. I'm watching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, how come I didn't think of that? That's awesome.
I'm pretty sure I blew Jen's eardrums on the phone when she told me about it.
I mean, you're right, Paige. That I'm watching it and I'm like, all right, study it, study it, study it. I was like, holy crap, that really is life changing. You're right. You don't have to do any of those steps again. That's awesome.
It saves a lot of time.
That is awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course. Anything to help make our lives easier and more efficient.
Any questions from anyone else or comments?
I unmuted myself. Can you show one thing that I have to do often for graphs is change the marker. For example, if I'm doing a toilet training graph, I'll have two competing data points on the same graph. Same for like manding too, if we're taking manding rate for prompted versus independent. And I'll turn one into a little X and have another symbol. Can you show us how to do that or walk us through making that change?
Yep. Let me try. Okay. So just changing like the shape of a marker?
Yes. I keep
Okay.
muted.
Oh no, that's okay. So everybody can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll simply just click your data point line. And you can come over here to marker. And there will be, so there's all these drop down tabs. So there's marker options, there's fill, there's border. So you'll simply just uncheck the marker options. And so the built-in one is that it's a circle. But you click this and you can change it to a square, diamond, triangle. Let's change it to X's for Chris. So you just select that. Oh, did I hit square? Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Okay. Let's see.
Sometimes to get the X's, sometimes you have to make the size of the marker bigger.
Okay. Well, here, let's see if I can. So we can show you how to make the marker bigger. So that's a little bigger. All right, we'll see if the X worked now.
And then see where it says size underneath of it?
Mm-hmm. All right.
There you go.
There it is. So it's still, hold on, I don't think I made them big enough. But that is the basic gist. So you'll come up to marker, you'll go marker options, and then the type, you'll just choose your different shape.
I think you have to get rid of the fill also.
To get rid of the fill?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. To get the X's.
So go check no fill.
Why do I not have a no fill?
It's at the top.
At the top above where it says solid fill.
There it is. Okay. go to our X's. There we go.
Yay.
So there's some X's.
Excellent.
So, and honestly, a lot of learning these things is just going in Excel and just kind of playing around and not being afraid to mess up. And just, I mean, I made some hypothetical data yesterday. I just typed in like random numbers and just create charts and kind of get used to the different settings. So I have a Mac, so it might be a little bit different for PC users, but it's just kind of getting used to the different tabs up here. If you, the line versus the marker, colors, like Chris just said, like with, and Paige, the no fill, making the size a little bit bigger. So just kind of playing around and just experimenting and getting used to it.
And when in doubt, Google always has really good answers for Excel graphing questions.
Well, that was great. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Anything anyone else would like to see? All right. Well, that was awesome. Great work. We'll be sending out some supplementary materials then. And if you ever have any graphing questions, then Jen and Paige are your go-tos.